part for the video. Hopefully y'all have a great Saturday. I'm gonna love to see y'all tomorrow for Mr. Baller Sunday. But for now, we got Anna Solves. Let's go ahead and get into it, man.
Sometimes we use the word insane to describe someone who did something silly. That's an exaggeration. In Andrea Yates' case, it is not an exaggeration. She needed all the help she could get, and yet everyone who claimed to love her turned a blind eye to her increasingly serious mental illness. After being hospitalized for a severe case of postpartum depression, her husband insisted that they have more children, and their religious fanatic friends convinced Andrea that she, like all women, is impure and her children are doomed. It was a recipe for disaster that no one seemed to notice until it was too late. And when Andrea snapped, she became one of the most frightening child killers in history. This is the full story of Andrea Yates. It was June 20th, 2001 in Houston, Texas. A lazy summer day when everyone wanted to lay low and wait for the cool evening. But the emergency services never really rest. And at 9:48 a.m. that day, they received one of their most disturbing calls.
Are you having disturbance like feel or what? You need an ambulance?
Andrea was right. She was ill, mentally ill. She had just taken the lives of all her 5 children, and one by one, youngest to oldest.
And all of them babies is crazy.
It had been a methodical act. In some ways, one of the most callous, calculated, and cold-blooded, premeditated murders one can imagine. But in other ways, it wasn't. When the officers arrested Andrea in her suburban house, she showed no remorse. She thought she had saved her children from going to hell.
Bitch, what?
That morning, Andrea gave her 4 eldest children, all boys, a cereal breakfast. Then she started a bath and took her baby daughter to the bathroom with her. There were 9 inches of cold water in the tub, just enough to drown her. Then she returned to the kitchen and, beginning with the next youngest, she drowned the rest of her children. With Mary's body still floating in the tub, finally, she laid their bodies on the bed. Noah, the eldest, tried to run when he saw his lifeless sister, but Andrea caught him too. Perhaps as a punishment, she left his body floating in the tub. A few minutes later, Andrea phoned 911, but refused to tell them what she'd done. 9 minutes later, she phoned her husband, Rusty, and told him to come back from work.
I couldn't imagine what actually happened, but I was worried because I'm like, well, Andrea called me with a firm tone, said I needed to come home, and so I did.
The first responders got to the scene before Rusty. When Officer Frank Stumpo walked in, he found Andrea sitting on the couch, staring blankly straight ahead.
I walked into the room, and I was expecting to find a man on the floor, a body. And I'm looking around, and I seen this little tiny head. And I was looking right at me.
Frank wanted to think it was a doll, but when he got closer, he realized what had happened. But it wasn't just a baby. Mary was the only one partially uncovered by the blanket Andrea had.
I ain't gonna lie, I don't see how police officers do this type of job, cause boy, I lose my mind. Not gonna lie.
On them.
I said, oh man, I picked up and as I continued to pick up the blanket, was one body after another. 1, 2, 3, 4. I walked back down the hallway, made a right turn into the bathroom, and there I found the oldest one floating face down in the tub.
When Frank and his fellow officers saw this, they did not know what to do. For a second, they had forgotten all their training.
All the training, all the scenes that you have made, everything that you have been taught and learned and instinct went right out the window.
When Rusty arrived home, there was a yellow line around his house. The officers wouldn't let him in. He sat on the grass crying after he learned what had happened. But as the authorities carried Andrea out in handcuffs, Rusty made a surprising statement.
And he started screaming, Andrea, you finally did it. Andrea, you really did it. She just sat there and just stared at the door with just blank look on her face. It was just like void of anything.
So Rusty knew his wife was threatening to unalive their babies. There was a lot to uncover behind Andrea's emotionless face. The investigation would reveal one of the most heartbreaking cases of postpartum depression and lack of support. Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on July 2nd, 1964 in Houston, Texas. She was the youngest of 5 children. She would go on to have and unalive the same number of children. Andrea was intelligent and ambitious as a child. At Milby High School, she was the class valedictorian, a member of the National Honor Society, and the swim team captain.
And she is ill. And she ill. Okay. All right.
Parents were so proud of her. They would always talk about her accomplishments at parties and dream out loud about their daughter reaching the stars. While Andrea was not religious back then, she was showing signs of mental illness. She exercised extreme control over herself with bulimia. More than a few times, she contemplated taking her own life. Sadly, she never revealed this side to her family. Perhaps they would have done their best to help her if she had, or perhaps they sensed she cared more about her accomplishments than her mental health, so she felt hopeless from the start. In 1986, Andrea graduated from the University of Texas School of Nursing. She became a registered nurse, and all her colleagues applauded her for her hard work and boundless care for her patients.
Grades were very important to her. Being a good daughter was very important to her. She went to nursing school and went to a very prestigious nursing school in Texas.
3 years later, she met Russell Yates while swimming in the apartment complex pool that they shared. Rusty was too shy to ask her out, but Andrea noticed how he looked at her and tried making awkward conversation. So one day, she knocked on his door and asked him out. In April 1993, they got married in a small ceremony. By now, Andrea was a devout Christian.
Hey guys, did you know it's so easy for anyone to get a car now? So there's a website that helps people.
The couple thus vowed to have as many children as nature would allow. So over the next 7 years, they had 4 boys and 1 girl, each named after a biblical figure. Noah, born in 1994, followed by John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, who was born in 2000.
I think the thing that surprised us was how fast that happened. She used to joke, she wouldn't like me to say this, but she called herself Fertile Myrtle. From the religion standpoint, I would say we're both pretty conservative.
Rusty was a successful engineer at NASA, but he was just as serious about his faith and was friends with a terrifying man named Michael Warniecki. Russell had met Michael Warniecki on the campus of Auburn University. Warniecki was an unconventional cleric who preached a zealous form of righteousness. Anything outside of austerity was a sin in his eyes. Also, everyone was doomed for eternity, apart from himself, his wife, and their children. And yet, Rusty fell under his spell and even saw him as a mentor. When he introduced him to Andrea, things took a turn for the worse. Michael would visit the family home and act disgusted by Andrea's children. Also, notice the double standards. Michael never said that they were Rusty's children too. He would only blame Andrea for their so-called impurity. He would also tell Rusty that Andrea did not deserve him, as she was not a virgin.
Shit, 1999, 2000, shit, I was a baby too, man. Ah, damn, but fellas, watch who y'all have children by, please. I ain't got none, so.
When the two got married. In short, Michael was a misogynist, and he used his cleric role to spread this belief.
Yelled at female students that they were all going to hell because they were studying and learning in a material world when they should be out there reproducing.
At this point, Andrea was already convinced that women derived from sin and that hellbound mothers would see their children burn in hell. From prison, Andrea would say, "It was the 7th deadly sin. My children weren't righteous. They stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could never be saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell." Rusty admitted that, looking back, Michael Warniecki only amplified whatever delusions Andrea already had and made them 10 times worse. Russell might defend the Warnieckis, but they had zero compassion or understanding of Andrea as a person. They didn't.
And watch who y'all bring around your family. For real. They bring around bad, negative energy. And that is bad, negative energy that they didn't need anyway. She already was going through shit anyways. And having illness. And he made it 10 times worse.
Even see her as a person at all. She was a toy for them to play with. Michael would tell her that she was doomed and unable to care for her children, and Rachel, his wife, would berate her for not practicing her faith right. This is what she wrote to her one day. I have seen so many women just continually put their salvation in Jesus. Then, as years slowly slip by, so does nay hope for them to truly be saved. The Warnieckis also bought Andrea a religious book about a caterpillar becoming a butterfly and praising death as the only pure kind of transformation. And Michael once published this poem.
Modern Mother Worldly was very, very lazy. All her children drove her crazy. The Bible told her to spank and train them, but society said she must never constrain them. The fruit of rebellion she did now see. On the day of judgment she will have no plea. Modern Mother Worldly, cast in hell. Now what becomes of the children of such a Jezebel?
Meanwhile, Michael would manipulate Rusty into living an increasingly modest life as a way to repent from their worldly sin.
That's one hell of a goddamn whatchamacallit, man. I ain't gonna lie to you.
In 1997, Rusty bought Michael's ragged bus and moved his entire family in there. By now, they were a family of 5. Imagine raising 3 babies in a 350 square foot bus.
Mrs. Yates was overwhelmed. She had begun
I've been losing my mind too.
and she just couldn't handle it.
The children slept on pellets, played with power tools, and were not allowed to use Pampers. And she had to do everything in the house or bus while her husband was at work.
She was changing diapers 24/7, washing diapers.
Yeah, that'll drive anybody crazy. I ain't gonna lie. You got 4 or 5 kids by yourself. Well, you should have been doing all that fucking. But still, you got 4 or 5 kids and you doing all that shit by yourself and no support system. And the husband at work. Of course, he have to be at work. Y'all gonna make money, but. Damn, where y'all family at? Y'all family ain't having 4 or 5 kids. It's fucking crazy. And you gotta just imagine hearing 4 or 5 kids cry at the same time. Cause one cry, they all gonna cry. I'll lose my goddamn mind too. I ain't gonna lie to you.
Not permitted to use Pamper.
I need some money. Yo, Darius, can I borrow a couple dollars? Don't we all do? How much you talking about, though? At least like 500.
Had to use cloth diapers because they were more basic. They were the salt of the earth.
All the while, Andrea was developing more and more severe cases of postpartum depression with each child. After giving birth to Luke, her 4th child, Andrea's mental health took a visible downturn. When Andrea started thinking of ending Luke's life, she tried taking her own to prevent this from happening. On June 18, 1999, Andrea and Rusty saw Dr. Norma Toriak after her attempt on her own life. After asking Andrea a few basic questions, Norma already knew Andrea wasn't supposed to have more children. She was diagnosed with postpartum depression, or PPD, with psychotic features. Norma thus advised Andrea to check herself into the Memorial Spring Shadows Glen Psychiatric Hospital. Norma also referred her case to the CPS after hearing about the conditions the Yates raised their children in. However, as there was no sign of evidence of neglect, the CPS refused to get involved. Psychiatrist Eileen Starbranch would take over Andrea's file, and she would prescribe Andrea increasingly stronger medication as her psychotic and depressive episodes got worse. Haldol, Cognition, Effextor XR, Wellbutrin, and others. Rusty said Andrea made a miraculous recovery after this. On August 18, 1999, Andrea told Eileen she was ready to have a 5th child. Eileen did not understand. She wanted to make sure Andrea understood what PPD meant. Having another child would make it worse again, maybe worse than ever before. The doctor said he advised her not to, and said that she was 100% certain that her psychosis would return if she had another child, meds or not. Not only would the couple not follow the doctor's advice, but when she saw Andrea again in January 2000, Dr. Eileen Starbranch wrote, "Patient wants to be off meds unless symptomatic. Husband agrees." Around this time, Andrea got pregnant again. This was when the couple decided to buy a small house in Clear Lake and move the family out of the bus. But although the
They should have just stopped fucking after that 3rd one.
kid's situation seemed better, it was in fact worse. In March 2001, Andrea turned to scripture following her father's death, and she also began engaging in horrific self-harm and refused to feed her daughter. These were bouts of postpartum psychosis, and yet her husband would tell her family that she had the baby blues.
It's not the same as the baby blues, which are very common
Fuck that, not feeding the child is crazy. I ain't never went hungry. I ain't gonna lie to you. Never went hungry as a kid. Never. I always had food. Always. I can't. Always. Refrigerator was always full. I ain't gonna lie to you. Not feed your child, that's crazy. I ain't gonna even lie to you. If you don't eat, you gotta make sure that kid eat. I ain't gonna care. That's dead ass wrong. I ain't gonna even lie to you.
Postpartum psychosis is only about one case in 1,000 births. Often a woman is very psychotic, hallucinations, delusions, confused, usually so severe it requires hospitalization.
She was hospitalized several times during this period, but as no one could keep her against her will, she often left the hospital a day or two later. It was often Rusty who convinced her to come home and take care of the children.
You know, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, I didn't know anything about mental illness or postpartum depression or psychosis or anything.
Sure, but you saw your wife pull out her own hair and scratch herself until she bled. And when Dr. Eileen Starbranch urged Rusty more strongly to bring his wife to the hospital, he decided not to visit Eileen anymore. He found a doctor closer to home who would save him the 45-minute drive and tell him what he wanted to hear. During Andrea's trial, the new doctor's mistakes proved so grave that he was partially blamed for the children's deaths.
If you have more and more children, the risk that you're going to have more of these episodes is higher. And with the psychotic episodes, they tend to get worse.
Andrea Yates' story made headlines around the world. The title, Mother of 5 Drowns All Her Children, was shocking enough, but as the story unfolded, it became an even bigger sensation. How come no one raised the alarm sooner? Well, several psychiatrists did, but Rusty and Andrea were so convinced by their religious role to have as many kids as possible, they ignored all alarms. During her interrogation, Andrea calmly confessed to unaliving her children. She also explained her motive.
If you've been getting scam texts like these, it probably means your data has been leaked. Now, some of you can identify these as scams.
We were trying to accomplish that, and we did take their children's lives.
Their innocent years would take months.
All right, and if you had not taken their lives, what did you think would happen?
So we continued stumbling.
And where they ended up?
Andrea claimed that stumbling meant misbehaving. Her kids, she said, were not right.
That's what the things that they do would show you they weren't right.
What do you mean? Bitch, what?
What a surprise! Kids aged 6 months to 7 years old don't always obey.
Rusty's mom would visit, they would not treat her well.
Clearly, Andrea did not understand reality as most of us do. She spoke without emotion and was convinced that she had actually saved her kids from going to hell. During her trial, a few horrible clues were revealed. First, when Andrea became pregnant with her last child, she stopped taking all medication. But one of the worst things a patient suffering from psychosis can do is interrupt medication or go on and off it. Second was Dr. Mohammed Saeed, the psychiatrist Rusty sought to replace Eileen after having her 5th child. Saeed never checked Andrea's medical file, or her previous attempts for her own life, or her severe postpartum psychosis. When Rusty said he wanted his wife off the meds, Saeed said okay and advised Andrea to stop taking them. This was a month before she unalived her children. However, Saeed diagnosed Andrea with depression and prescribed her the maximum dosage of Effexor XR. This med is known to cause manic episodes in psychotic patients. 2 weeks before Andrea did the worst, Rusty became concerned with her behavior, so he asked Saeed to put his wife back on Haldol. To this, he simply said, it's bad medicine. He also told Andrea, you need a more positive attitude. Chin up. It's hard to believe a psychiatrist would even think of saying this.
This whole story fucked up. Both sides wrong, because the husband dead ass wrong too. He, on so many levels. It kind of is the husband's fault too.
Eileen Starbranch said Andrea was the sickest patient she'd ever had. She was a person in crisis, and she never got the help she needed. Instead, people minimized her problems and then blamed them on religious impurity. Andrea's defense attorney presented a thorough insanity defense, but he couldn't prove that Andrea was unable to tell right from wrong at the time of the incident. So she was sentenced to death on 5 counts of first-degree murder. In 2005, Andrea, however, obtained a new trial after the court discovered false testimony from the prosecution.
We, the jury, find the defendant Andrea P.A. Yates not guilty by reason of insanity.
She was sentenced to remeditation at the Kernville State Hospital, a low-security mental health facility in Texas, which one of her lawyers described as a watershed event in the treatment of mental illness. She herself insists that she never be released. It is the only way she can atone for what she did, she says. Her case opened up discussions of mental health and PPD awareness that changed the law forever.
This didn't happen to Andrea Yates because she's an evil, criminal, bad person that needs to be killed. This happened to Andrea Yates because she has a biologic medical illness called psychosis.
Rusty divorced Andrea after the first trial. He has since remarried and had a son.
And it took me probably more time than it should have, but I finally came to the understanding that there's a difference between forgiveness and consequences.
Andrea's former psychiatrist and attorney started a fund in her children's names, working to help mothers suffering from mental illness. Rusty also earned a law degree and is working toward the same goal. Andrea is still in contact with them and undergoing treatment. Today, she expresses nothing but regret, but she will have to live with the memory of what she did for the rest of her life.
5 children is crazy. My mother's out there. I know y'all be watching my channel. What is y'all opinion on this story? I know y'all finna go crazy in the comments. I know there's some female parents out here that watch my channel. I already know. And just females in general, y'all finna watch my shit and go crazy. I already know. That being said, give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe. See y'all motherfuckers on the next video. And the songs, this story was crazy. I felt like the dad was wrong too in a way, because you don't supposed to, you know what I'm saying, get involved with nobody mental illness, tell them what they need to stop taking or none of that. That medicine could have helped her. Even though she probably didn't like it. That shit, it probably could have helped her. That being said, you can throw a like, subscribe, see y'all in the next video. Let's ride and see when I see y'all.